Continues to be the global hub of terrorism. It is home to thousands of armed terrorists. It remains on the FATF grey list for failing to act against terror financing. But like always, Pakistan once again made false allegations against India at the United Nations. Pakistan Prime Minister Imran Khan raised the Kashmir issue in the 75th United Nations General Assembly. India promptly responded to Khan's comments. India requested the United Nations for the floor to exercise the right to reply in response to Pakistan Prime Minister's statements. Indian delegate Mijito Vinito, who had earlier walked out of the hall when Imran Khan's pre-recorded statement was being played, presented India's stand.
We saw lies, misinformation, warmongering, and malice spread through this assembly. The words used today at this great assembly by the leader of Pakistan demean the very essence of the United Nations. For a nation that is deeply buried in medievalism, it is understandable that the tenets of a modern civilized society, such as peace, dialogue, and diplomacy, are far-fetched. Allow me, Mr. President, to jog their minds a little about the stellar record of Pakistan. This is the country that brought genocide to South Asia 39 years back when it killed its own people. This is also the country that is shameless enough not to offer a sincere apology for the horrors it perpetrated even after so many years. This is the same country that provides pensions for dreaded and listed terrorists out of state funds. This is the same country that has the dubious distinction of hosting the largest number of terrorists proscribed by the United Nations. The leader whom we heard today is the same person who referred to the terrorist Osama bin Laden as a martyr in his parliament in July. The same leader who spewed venom today admitted in 2019 in public in the US that his country still has about 30,000 to 40,000 terrorists who have been trained by Pakistan and have fought in Afghanistan and in the Indian Union territory of Jammu and Kashmir. The only crowning glory that this country has to show to the world for the last 70 years is terrorism, ethnic cleansing, majoritarian fundamentalism, and clandestine nuclear trade.
Pakistan Prime Minister Imran Khan had raised the Kashmir issue and criticized the Indian government on several issues. After Khan's speech, T.S. Tirumurthy, India's permanent representative to the United Nations, tweeted that the country would use the right to reply to respond to Pakistan. India's response to Pakistan makes it India's third right to reply. The first two were also made in response to Pakistan raking up the issue of Jammu and Kashmir during the ongoing UNGA earlier this week. Joining us on this broadcast is WION's principal diplomatic correspondent Siddhant Sibal for more details on this story. Siddhant, like the Indian diplomat mentioned there, Pakistan continues to be the global hub of terrorism. Imran Khan called Osama bin Laden a martyr. In fact, Osama bin Laden, one of the world's most dreaded terrorists, was hunted down by US forces inside Pakistan. And it's a state policy of Pakistan, isn't it, as far as sponsoring terror to create unrest in Kashmir is concerned, isn't it? So why is Imran Khan all the time raking up India at the UNGA and not focusing on the growth of his own country?
Well, it has been a packed schedule at the United Nations General Assembly, packed 24 hours, half of it is over. We saw the statement by the Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan, and answering your question why the Pakistani Prime Minister has been focusing on India, well, that has been the pastime, the national pastime of Pakistan for last 70 years. In fact, the Pakistani Prime Minister mentioned India 20 times and Kashmir 18 times in his speech at the United Nations General Assembly, and this was on expected line. And in fact, this is what Pakistan has been doing at various multilateral forums. If you look at what's happening at the United Nations in Geneva, where the Human Rights Council is underway, we have seen how the Pakistani diplomats have been using the forum to talk about India and less about more constructive activities. So we have seen the replies by the Indian side as well. The Indian diplomat slamming Pakistan, and of course the Indian envoy also slamming Pakistan, saying it's a new low in diplomatic engagement by Pakistan, and we all have now seen the visuals of how the Indian diplomat walked away while Pakistani Prime Minister was speaking at the UNGA, which of course is a royal snub by New Delhi to Islamabad. But by and large, the big focus now is on the speech of the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. He will be addressing the UNGA at 6:30 p.m. Indian Standard Time today, and that will be a speech that everyone will be focusing on, given the fact that how the Indian Prime Minister has been focusing on much more constructive activities or global engagement. Remember his first address at the United Nations General Assembly, he gave the idea of Yoga Day, International Yoga Day, and since then we have seen how this has become a part and parcel of global diplomatic engagement every year.
Siddhant, you were mentioning, and we saw those visuals as well, as Indian diplomat walked out when Imran Khan began his speech. It signifies the importance that India is giving to Imran Khan's rant at the UNGA, isn't it? Time and again, Pakistan has failed to garner any sympathy as far as their stand on Kashmir is concerned. Even a couple of days back, India raised the issue of Gilgit as well, saying that Gilgit, Baltistan belongs to India under international law. But like you rightly mentioned, focus is on Prime Minister Modi's speech later today. What are the key highlights that he is going to address?
Well, this speech will be focusing on number of issues, whether it's the COVID crisis, whether it is reforms at the United Nations General Assembly, whether it's India's peacekeeping mission, because India is one of the largest troop contributor country to the UN peacekeeping missions, and of course the issue of terrorism, specifically cross-border terrorism. Remember, India has been calling for a common definition of terrorism through the CCIT, that is the Comprehensive Convention on International Terrorism. India proposed it way back in 1996, and since then we have seen no movement because of the lack of consensus by the member states, because the countries can't agree on one thing, the common definition that what is terrorism. So the Indian Prime Minister is expected to talk about that, but by and large this will be a speech that will set tone for India's other diplomatic engagement. Remember, India takes the high table, that is becoming the non-permanent member of the United Nations Security Council for 2 years period starting from 1st of January 2020, and this speech by the Indian Prime Minister is going to give out the agenda, the vision of what India will be talking about when it will be sitting at the United Nations Security Council. So number of things that the Indian Prime Minister is going to focus on, but the big focus will be on how the world community should speak in one voice when it comes to the issue of terrorism, and also how the world community whose action has been criticized by everyone should act in one way when it comes to dealing with challenges like the COVID crisis and weakening multilateralism. This is something that has been a reoccurring theme of the Indian diplomacy in past few months, given the fact that how amidst the COVID crisis there has been lack of global response, especially by the United Nations itself. Remember that the United Nations itself took many months before it could finally discuss the COVID crisis. Initially, we saw the apprehension by China, who wasn't keen that the COVID crisis discussed at the United Nations Security Council. But by and large, there was global pressure, and ultimately we saw discussions on COVID-related issues at the United Nations as well.
Siddhant, thank you so much for joining us on this broadcast and getting us all the updates ahead of Indian Prime Minister Modi's speech at the UNGA. We'll keep coming back to you for more updates on the story.